Good morning. Today's daf, the last daf in the third parak of Elu Treifos of Masechet Chullin is daf Samach Zayin. We are a few lines down on Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. One, two, three, four, five. Where is it? Uh, It's the first word on the line on the seventh line, Ve'ema. That's what we're up to. So what have we just done? So we identified a um klal uprado klal. The pasuk says b'mayim twice. The pasuk goes as follows: Et zeh tochlu. This is what you should eat. Mikol asher b'mayim, from things that are in the water. Kol asher los napir v'kaskeses, things that have fins and scales, b'mayim, in the water, bayamim, in the seas, v'nachalim, in the rivers, osam tochelu. That's what you should eat. So twice it says b'mayim, which is a general rule about the location of the items, and once it says bayamim v'nachalim. And so as a result, the Gemara applies a klal uprat uklal. We explain that even though the word b'mayim appears two times in a row, they say in the West, kol makom she'ata motzei shnei klalos hamsmuchim zel lezeh, that whenever you find two generations that are juxtaposed to one another, we can put hatel prat beinehem. You can put the specific one in the middle. So now this becomes a klal uprat uklal. And so what do we learn from it? Just as one requires a fins and scales with respect to something that it lives in seas and rivers, so too in other bodies of water other than other than pits, ditches, and caves and kalim, you would need to have fins and scales. And so, what's the implication of this? Is that for creatures that grow in pits, ditches, and caves, and in kalim, you would not need you would not need to have fins and scales, and you would still be able to eat them. So that was the klal upradu klal that we just learned. So the Gemara asks the question again, seventh line, first word on the line. Ve'ema ma'aprat meforish mayim gedalim al gabi karka. But one second, maybe we could be more general. Don't just say that seas and streams and seas and rivers implies things that have wells underneath them, that it's any body that's like a canal or a pond that has water underneath them, and that would is what must have fins and scales in order for it to be kosher. Say the following: Av kol mayim gedalim al gabi karka. Any water that's on the ground. So the only thing, so umay rabbi, and what would that come to even include? Afilu baruch, meaning even things that grow in pits, ditches, and caves would be considered prohibited if they don't have fins and scales. And so, umay miet. And so, what would be excluded? Miet kalim. We would only exclude things that grow in water in vessels. And that would be the only thing that we would exclude. So, im kain tochlu mai ahani lay. So, you can't say that, the Gemara says, because if you were to say that, it would undermine the additional suggestion of the word tochlu, because the in the pasuk that we read, at zeh tochlu, this is what you should eat. You don't need to say that, because at the end of the pasuk it says osam tochelu. So the fact that we have an extra reference to eating suggests that more is edible than we might have otherwise thought. And so therefore, when we have these two choices as to what would get included in this klal u'prad klal, we are going to include less in the klal u'prad klal, so as more ends up being edible. More will be edible without the need to have fins and scales. Okay, and so now debay Rabbi Yishmael Tana. So now it's not. This is not the only way that one can read these verses and come to the same conclusion. Again, the way that we use the conclusion right now is we use the principle of klal u'prad klal. Now we're going to use a different principle. Bamayim shtei pamim ein zeh klal u'prad. This reference to water and water, and then to the seas and the streams, that's not a klal u'prad. Ella riba umiyet. Rather, it is a riba umiyet. And so we're going to use the same principle that we mentioned before, that if you have two essentially ribas in a row, we're going to and then a miyat, we're going to put the miyat in between them, and we're going to treat this again as a riba miyat uriba. And so what does that mean? Meaning, again, there are two basic philosophies of how we deal with generalizations and specifics. The one that we just were dealing with of a klal u'prad klal, what we say when you have a klal u'prad klal is that everything is included that is similar to the prat. Whereas when you do riba miot uriba, then we're going to say, no, it's even more inclusive. It's not just things that are similar to the prat, it's everything that isn't the opposite of the prat. That's what's going to be included. And we're going to end up, though, in the same place in this particular instance. And so let's take a look. So continuing on, second word on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13th line down in the Gemara. Bamayim riba. So the water is, in the water is an inclusion. It says that we should include more. By yamim u'v'nachalim miyit. The word seas and streams, as we said, we're going to put that in the middle, even though it's at the end, and we're going to say that's a limit. And b'mayim chazar v'riba, and we have another water that references a greater inclusion. So riba umiyodum riba. So what does that tell you? Riba hakol. It includes everything except those that are absolutely different from the miyet. So my Rabbi. So what should we include? Charitzin uneitzin leisura. It's telling us that canals and ponds that have mayans beneath them that are more natural in their formation. Leisura, that is what is going to be covered by the prohibition that says you can only eat things that have fins and scales. And if it doesn't have fins and scales, it's going to be prohibited. And so as a result, any kind of creature that grows in canals and ponds, if it doesn't have fins and scales, is going to be prohibited. Umay mi'et. And what is it excluding? It's telling us that when it comes to ponds and ditches, to pits and ditches and caves that don't have any source water, it's all pooled water. If you have something that grows in there, it's going to be kosher, even if it does not have fins and scales. Again, this is at the end of the day, we say don't eat bugs anyway, no matter what. But this is really quite remarkable that effectively we're saying that the bugs that naturally grow in those locations are going to be kosher to eat. So, Ema my riba. So in second, but maybe we could say that what is going to be included? Maybe we should say that anything that grows in pits, ditches, and caves should also be subject to the requirement of having fins and scales. And therefore, a sheretz that grows in them, if it doesn't have fins and scales, it's going to be not kosher. Umay miyat, and what will we exclude? The only thing we'll exclude is miyat kalim. When you ask what is the exact opposite of yamim unachalim, that's going to be vessels. The water in vessels is completely the opposite of yamim unachalim, seas and streams, seas and rivers. And so as a result, then maybe we should do it that way. No, again, same problem that we had with trying to say that the klalu prat should be like that. The im kain tochlu my ahanile. Why are we repeating the word tochlu or tochelu in this pasuk two times? What is it coming to do? And it must be coming to expand the things that are kosher even without fins and scales. But 1 second, maybe we should say the exact opposite. Maybe we should say that when it comes to borot shichin umaaros, that they need to have the fins and scales, and the neitzim and the charitzin, they don't need to have fins and scales, as Rashi tells us for epoch ana, right? Third line in the Y lines of Rashi, Dekevan delav taima yahiv lamilse. Because we've given in this Miyat and Reba approach to trying to understand what exactly is covered by the requirement for fins and scales, we have not given a reason for why things are similar to the Yamim and Naharim, Yamim and Nachalim. So as a result, that's why we're going to say, hey, we need, maybe we could do the opposite. Whereas when we did the Klal Prado Klal, we explained that Yamim and Nachalim have well springs underneath them. And so as a result, that's why when we are going to include something, the first thing that we need to include is the charitzin and the itzim, because they also have well springs underneath them. But now in our miyut and ribui approach, we did not have any kind of guiding principle. And so as a result, continuing on in Rashi, on the fourth line, second word, kishar, ke'ein haprat, to say that it has to be like the prat. So ema tochlu slamishre charitzin v'riboy l'rabuye boros. And so let's say that what you can eat is the things that are growing in the canals and the what's the other word? And ponds, and what we're coming to include in the prohibition are the pits, ditches, and caves. And so, why don't we say that? So, Kidatani, back into the Gemara. We are now one. It's the second to last word on counting up in the narrow lines of the Gemara. It's 6, 9, 12, 15, 17 lines up. So Kedetani Matitya. So as Matitya taught, Detani Matitya bar Yehuda, Myra ita l'rabos boros shichin uma'aros le'atera. Why should we include pits, ditches, and caves and say that their creatures can be kosher even if they don't have fins and scales? And ulahotzi charitzin u'neitzin le'isura. And we say that when it comes to the canals and the ponds, they have to have fins and scales or they won't be kosher. Merabe ani borot shichin uma'aros. Why not include the pits, ditches, and caves? Shehein atzurim kechelim, because they are contained like vessels. Umotzi ani charitzin uneitzin, and I'll exclude the canals and ponds she'ein atzurim kechelim, because they are not contained like vessels. So, sorry, that was the answer. The point is that which one of these things? We certainly know that the absolute opposite of seas and streams are vessels. And so, which one is more similar to vessels? Well, that's pits, ditches, and caves. And so, as a result, that's why pits, ditches, and caves are going to be included in what is permitted, and canals and ponds are going to be excluded. And so canals and ponds also require fins and scales, whereas pits, ditches, and caves, like vessels, do not. And so as a result, we've now seen that there were two different ways that we can learn that certain things that grow in not in sort of standing water are going to be considered kosher, even if they don't have fins and scales. So
But
yesterday,
aren't we talking about two different? That's just what I'm confused. Aren't we talking about two different? What's the word I want? It's not really species or well, the
creature
different.
types.
I want to say species. Well, one are the what we would consider in a broad category of fish. I understand that shellfish are not really fish, but I'm not getting into the biology per se. But in a broad category of fish, which actually live, propagate in the water, versus the insects, the flies, they are not water laden creatures. They don't live in the, they don't develop there. They happen to hover around there. They use the water, but they don't grow there. They don't exist there. I mean, they
So,
use the
so let's
water.
be clear. Let's be clear. We are not talking about any kind of fly that only lays eggs outside of water. But if you're talking about mosquitoes, which certainly lay eggs in water and things of that sort, as long as the object itself that's growing is in the water, that is going to be included in this discussion of what exactly is required of a growth for it to be kosher. And so effectively, any kind of, again, I'll use mosquitoes as a simple example, right? If I don't know that mosquitoes could lay eggs in the ocean, but if they lay eggs in a stream, for example, so then that will automatically already not be kosher. But if they lay eggs in a tire, in the water that's in a tire, so then and then somebody drinks that water, essentially, as long as those eggs had never been outside of that water body, again, not advising it, but it seems like, based on what we're saying, you would not be violating the prohibition of eating things that grow in water, and require scales and fins. You would be okay. Now, again, not advisable. And in fact, I think it would still be subject to at least a rabbinic prohibition about eating disgusting things. And of course, standing water in and of itself raises issues, because if it's not covered, so then it's that in and of itself is a problem. But the bottom line is that with the exclusion of the fly situation that you raised, because there's nothing connecting it to the water at this moment, we're talking about something that's growing in the water at this very moment. Then we ask the question, well, what's the nature of that water? Is it like seas and streams, and therefore the thing that's growing must have fins and scales, or it's not going to be kosher? And so as a result, all bugs in that context, and their eggs and seeds, and any kind of eels, and whatever kind of growth you might have, non-microscopic growth, is going to be non-kosher. But in the context of a water that filled up a cave and has no underground source, it's not a spring that's there. It's just water that flowed from snow and rain into that location. That is going to be anything that grows in that context is going to be kosher, even if it doesn't have fins and scales. And that's, again, a remarkable statement. I had not realized that until we learned this Gemara. But that's exactly what we're saying. And the point is that we're learning it from the fact that the pasuk that requires fins and scales is limited. And so as a result, and we asked yesterday, well, maybe what we're really saying is that if you have fins and scales in the cave, maybe then even that's not kosher. And we said, nope, it says tochelu or tochlu. And so as a result, it's got to be, we're adding things that are edible, not things that are not edible. And so, and during the,
Edible.
and so as a,
Edible. What do you mean edible? Are these
we're saying
products?
we're adding things that are kosher. We're saying that more things are kosher than we would have thought otherwise.
So,
And
for
so
instance,
as a
if a
result,
person had,
these bugs that grow in, I want to be explicit. The Gemara is saying that bugs that grow, you have a cup of water, a cave, a pit, and you have water in it, and all of a sudden now something is growing in it, and you see it. You could potentially eat it as long as it was in that water all the time, and we'll see that as soon as it comes out of the water, it's going to be prohibited. But as long as it's in that water, it's going to be permitted.
well, for instance, if a person has oyster farm, people they raise oysters or they raise eels, for instance. So if he raises his eels in a tire, like you said, or oysters in a tire in his backyard, he has water there. Could he eat the oysters because it's not? Oh, he's not raising the oysters in
I
the.
am not advising anything from a practical halachic perspective, but that is certainly what it's coming to at the moment. Now, obviously, if you put it
I'm not
there,
asking. I'm not asking for a lucky. I'm asking from a Gemara
yeah, from the
perspective.
Gemara perspective, I don't know because we're assuming right now on some level an understanding of some level of spontaneous generation, not true spontaneous generation, meaning it's okay. It seems to have been generated there, right? In order for you to have the farm that you're talking about, there needs to be you're going to have put something in there that is not microscopic. And so as a result, when you put it in there, it was already not kosher, so it's not going to be kosher. But if somehow an eel were to grow from nothing, it just somehow there was a seed there that nobody could see, and it's microscopic, and now it grows into an eel, then yes, that eel would be kosher if it grew in that tire. But
Mm-hmm.
the problem is in your example, you were saying a farm. So of course the person's putting something in there. It's not going to be microscopic, and therefore it's going to be a problem. And so as a result, and I would argue that if you affirmatively put it there, even if it was microscopic, it probably would be a problem itself. So the farm situation, I really want to put to the side because it's so different than what we're talking about. We're talking about where it looked like there was nothing here in this water, and then all of a sudden now something's growing in the water. And so that thing that's growing in the water, it depends on the nature of the water. If you've got a closed system with no other water sources to it. That's the pit, the ditch, the cave, the vessel, all of those systems. The thing that's growing there is going to be considered kosher. And on the other hand, if it's not in that situation, if it's more like the seas and streams, and so canals and ponds, and so as a result, in those situations, well, now all of a sudden, even in those situations, you need to have fins and scales. And so these things that are growing don't have fins and scales, and so they won't be kosher. And so that's the current state of play. Now, I would get back into the Gemara. We are it's from the bottom of the narrow lines in the Gemara. We are the last word on the line, 12 lines up from where the word from where the Gemara gets wide. High is the last word on the line, and that's what we're up to. And so the Gemara is now going to raise the following issue. We talked about an earlier brisa that we learned yesterday noted the fact that the various shrutzim are permitted in certain circumstances. Again, they're going to be permitted in the pits, ditches, caves, and vessels situation, that they are permitted twice in the Torah, once explicitly and once implicitly. Okay, and so now but we never said which one was which. And so now the Gemara answers that question. Hi susam v'hai mashafurish. Which one, where is it that the Torah says that the shrutzim that grow in the pits, ditches, caves, and vessels are going to be permitted, and which explicitly, and which one only implies that without being explicit? So pligi ba Rav Acha v'Ravina. Rav Acha and Ravina disagree about it. Chad Amar yesh lo meforish. That one says that when the Torah requires, and it's important to note one more thing before we get into this Gemara, the Torah twice set references the fact that something needs to have fins and scales. Once it says it affirmatively that what can you eat? You can eat something that has fins and scales. And then it says it in the negative form. It says what can you not eat? Anything that does not have fins and scales. So when we say now that one of these opinions says yesh lo meforish, it's saying that when the Torah says that an animal that does have a fin and a scale that you can eat, that is the one where it's being explicit about we're learning from that just that because again that pasuk references seas and streams. And therefore, because it references seas and streams, therefore, in vessels, pits, ditches, and caves, it's going to be kosher even without fins and scales. Ve'ein lo sasum, and according to this view, when the Torah says that if it doesn't have these things, it's going to be not kosher, that's the implicit situation. V'chad amar, and the other one says, Ain lo meforish. No, it's the exact opposite. When it specifically tells us that that when it doesn't have these things, it's going to be not kosher in streams and seas. Well, then what's the implication of that? The explicit implication of that? Well, if it's not in a sea or a stream, then it doesn't need to have fins and scales, and so therefore that one is going to be kosher. V'yesh lo sasam, and it's when you say that the creatures need, in order to be edible, need to have fins and scales. That's the one that's implied. So my taima demanda amar yesh lo, because and now we're going to explain the two viewpoints. Why does the person who say that when it has those items, that's the meforish, that's the explicit situation? Amar lach, he'd tell you, minehu dekam mishterul kalim, that from this verse you can clearly see that when is it that you require fins and scales in order to be able to eat it? It's because it's in the seas and streams. The implication of that is, according to this view, is that if it's in a vessel, well, then you don't even need to have fins and scales, and it'll be kosher and edible, even if it doesn't have fins and scales. And my time of demand to ummer ain't lo meforish. And why does the one who says that when it tells you that if it doesn't have fins and scales, it's not going to be kosher? That's the more explicit teaching of the fact that when it's in vessels and pits, ditches, and caves, it's going to be kosher even without fins and scales. Because the implication of that verse is explicitly the fact that it's going to be kosher, that it's only the things that grow in seas and streams that require that if they don't have fins and scales are going to be not kosher. But if it were to grow in a vessel, pit, ditch, or cave, well then even without the fins and scales it'll be kosher. Because if you were to tell me that the verse that says that only if you have fins and scales is it going to be kosher, that's the verse that's explicit, I might say, Hava Amina Bekalim, that the only thing that is included there is just vessels. Afagav de Isle Nami Lo Techal. And really, and that though I'm sorry, Hava Amina, I might have said that when it comes to Bekalim, Afagav de Isle Nami Lo Techal, that even if it has fins and scales, you would not be able to eat it. And so as a result, it's only the repetition of giving it in the opposite direction and telling us that if it does not have fins and scales, you cannot eat it. That's what tells you that when it's in a vessel, you can eat it even when it has no fins and scales. Okay, so again, Not advising eating any kind of bugs that grow, even in vessels that do not have fins and scales. But that is where this Gemara comes out. Now, the Gemara, the fact that we permit shrutzim that germinate in vessels or pits, ditches, and caves, that applies not only when these contain water, but even when they contain other beverages, as we are about to see. Amar Rav Huna.
But didn't it just say nami lo techon? And you were saying that.
Right. That was the Hava Amina. That's why if I might have thought, right? It was a Hava Amina. I might have thought that in vessels you would not be able to eat it if we only had the verse that said that you can eat creatures with fins and scales in seas and rivers. I might have thought that what was that teaching? That only you can eat those vessels in rivers and streams, I mean, in seas and streams. But in a vessel, you could not eat those things. But in fact, because the Torah also tells you the prohibition that says what you can't eat are things that do not have fins and scales when it comes to seas and streams. Therefore, when it comes to vessels and other places, even if it doesn't have fins and scales, you are going to be able to eat it. Okay, so that's exactly right. That was the Havamina that we ended up with there. And we reject that Havamina. Again, both different viewpoints as to how we understand the brisa that we had in Torah's Kohanim. But in the bottom line is that fins, if you have a creature that does not have fins and scales, if it's growing in a vessel, pit, ditch, or cave, and you didn't put it there, obviously, yeah, it grew spontaneously from those things, meaning from a microscopic organism to something that you can now see with your naked eye, that is still going to be considered kosher because of the nature of the water in which it grew. All right, so Rav Huna now says, Lo lish be'inish shechra b'tzivyasa be'urta, that one should not, let's see what Rashi tells us. Rashi sort of helps out here, how, in addition to the English, but here's how you can know that this English is correct. Shechra shel tamarim. We're talking about the fourth line up in the bottom of Rashi on Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, that when you have beer from dates, umitsuyin behem talayim, and there are worms in it, b'tzivyasa, tzivesha misaninin oto derech eitzim v'kashim dakim, where you have small pieces of wood that are used as a filter, b'ursa, and you do it at night. She'im tipol tolaz al hakashim. Because why is that a problem? Why should you not do that? Right? That's what the Gemara says. Lo lishpe. Don't pour this beer through the wood chips at night, because if one of those worms were to go onto one of the chips, lo yira'ena, you won't see it. Umisham tipol kli, and then it'll get washed off that piece of wood and into the vessel. Ulamachar, and tomorrow, Kishayir'ena, when you see it, Yehe Savar Shalo Yatsasam min Shekar. You'll think that it never left the beer, that it went through the sieve with the beer, and therefore it's going to be kosher. Yatsasam min Shekar lekashim. And didn't, on the hard on the surfaces, v'tolas hamayim muteres keda'amran, and you'll think that those worms are kosher, as we have been saying. So, and so again, and now the Gemara tells us exactly why. Dilma parish la'el mitzivyasa. Maybe it came on the chips, on the wood pit chips at some point. V'hadar nafil akasa, and then it fell back into the cup. Vahavi over mishum sheretz hashoretz al haaretz. Because why is it that these things are not considered bugs? It's because bugs are in two different categories. There's sheretz hashoretz al haaretz. Those are all prohibited, again, unless they're one of the specifically categorized items like the grasshoppers, etc., that are specifically kosher that we saw the other day. But when it comes to things that are in water, the main principle that we use is to say, does it have fins and scales? And so that's our basis. And since grew in an area that doesn't require fins and scales because it just grew in the beer from our visible perspective, so then it would be kosher. So ihachi b'mananami. Well, one second, if that's your concern, then maybe it will go onto the wood. How can you put it in any new vessel? Dilma parish ledafna. Maybe it went on the wall. Demana v'hadar nafilamana. That when you were pouring it, it went onto the wall and then it fell into the vessel. No, hasam hainu revise. No, that's where it lives. Meaning, as long as you're pouring from one vessel into another vessel, all those vessels are considered where it lives, and therefore the walls of those vessels are not going to create a problem. Uminat tamra. And how do I know that that's the case? Titania, because I have the following brisa. Minayan larabos aros. How do I know that when you have a bug that it could be permitted in a pit, ditch, and cave? Shishocha, the shosa mehen, that you can bend down and drink from those areas, and you don't have to worry about what's growing in them. And one can understand, by the way, why we would have this requirement, because basically, from a practical perspective, that's the water that they had. And so they needed to be able to drink the water. Ve'eno nimna, and he doesn't have to stop from drinking that, even though there are these shrutzim, these insects that seem to have grown in the water. Talmud Lomar, tochlu mikol asher b'mayim. You can eat from anything that's in the water. So v'leichash dimel parish v'dafna v'hadar nafil. So why aren't we worried now? As that was the brisa. So why aren't we worried about it going to the wall of the cistern, of the pit, of the ditch, of the cave? Elahainu revise. It's because that's where they live. Hachanami hainu revise. So too here, when it goes from one vessel to another, it's where it lives. Amrle Rav Chisda Rav Huna.
So we were saying it lives in the beer, or lives in the wine, or whatever it may
Yes,
be.
that's exactly what we're saying. We never saw it before it became macroscopic when it was in the beer or the wine. That's exactly correct.
So it grew in the beer and the wine, sustained itself from that, more or
Correct.
less.
Correct. So Amrle Rav Chisda Rav Huna. So Rav Chisda says to Rav Huna, Tanya Misayelach, I'm going to teach another brisa that supports you. Kol hasheret hashoretz al haaretz. The Torah tells us that what is prohibited, it's the things that grow on the ground. L'rabos yavachushin shesinanan. This comes to include the yavchushin, these translated here as gnats that grow, that are filtered out of the wine. And so what's the implication? Taima desinanon. The reason that they're prohibited is because they were filtered out. Because now that you filtered them out, they are considered on the ground. Halo sinanon. If you hadn't yet filtered them out, share, they would be permitted. So again, that the bottom line is that the things that grow, again, not advising anybody to eat any of these things, but the things that grow don't have the prohibition of being not kosher because they lack fins and scales. They might be disgusting and therefore you shouldn't eat them, but they're not kosher for that reason. So Amar Shmuel, Kishus, Shehisliya, if you have a cucumber that became wormy, as we turn to Samach Zayin Amabet, Bi'ibeha, when it was attached to the ground, as Rashi tells us, first two words on the Rashi of Samach Zayin Amabet, Bi'a, Ba'oda Mechuberis, when it's still attached to the ground. Back into the Gemara, second word on the top line. Asura mishum hasheret hashoretz ala haaretz. Because it grew in the cucumber while the cucumber was attached to the ground, that is going to be prohibited. Lema misayele. Maybe we should say that a brisa supports Shmuel, that only when it's attached to the ground, it's going to be prohibited. The Tanichada, because we have one brisa, al haaretz, that when something is on the ground, that's when it's prohibited. Lotzi as hazizin shiba adashim. It comes to exclude the gnats that you find, the bugs that you find in lentils. That hayatushim shibechleisim, and similarly the other kinds of bugs that are in the chickpeas. The tolat and the worms shibit tamarim grows and the worms that are in the dates and the figs. So that's brisa number one. Vitanya idach, and we have another brisa. Kol hasheret hashoretz al haaretz, that anything that creeps on the ground. L'rabos tolas shebikare zesim or shebikare gifanim. That it comes to include what is prohibited, the worms that are on the stems of olives and the stems of grapes. So, what's the distinction? Because the first one says that these various bugs are going to be kosher when they're in the lentils, the chickpeas, and the dates and the figs. Whereas the other worms are not going to be kosher when they're on the stems of olives and the stems of grapes. So, my lav idi idi beperim. So, aren't both of these dealing with where the stuff grew in the fruit? V'habi ibeha. One of them was when it grew, when it was attached to the ground. V'ha shalobi ibeha. And one of them refers to when it grew, when it was not attached to the ground. No, not necessarily. Lo, it could be that both of them are when attached to the ground. Below kasha, and there's no difficulty whatsoever. Habefere, that the first situation is when it's in the fruit itself, and when something, and unlike what Shmuel said, that if it grows when it's in the fruit itself, even when it's attached to the ground, that's considered not growing on the ground, and haba ilana gufa, and the other one is when it grew on the tree, and daikanami. In fact, you could say it seems very clear that that is in fact the distinction, because the katani, because the second brisa said tolash vikari zesim vishabi karig fanim, that when it comes to the worms that are growing on the stems of the olives and the stems of the grapes, so shmamina, in fact, that is a good proof. We do not support Shmuel, and in fact, as a result, we're going to say that that when it comes to these little creatures, if they're inside the fruit, the vegetable, whatever it is, the lentils, the chickpeas, the dates, the figs, they are going to be kosher. Again, assuming that they were never outside. If they were outside them and went inside, so then they're not going to be kosher. So that's the very important distinction that we are making here. So boy, Rav Yosef.
What's the difference between the tree? The tree is on the ground.
Well, the
Right.
tree itself, right? The tree itself. So, what we were again, Shmuel was trying to say that even if something grew within the fruit while it was attached to the ground, that's considered creeping and crawling on the ground. Whereas in the end, we say that no, it's not a definitive proof, and we're going to say that when something grows in the fruit itself, it is separate from growing on the ground. But if it grows on the tree itself is considered growing on the ground. So that's the distinction that we end up making.
So
So
in the
my
fruit, it's separate from going on the ground.
Correct. The fruit is not necessarily, we've given no definitive proof one way or the other with respect to growing within the fruit. So by Rav Yosef asked the following: Persha umesa mahu. What happens if it grew in the fruit? If you grew in the if it in a fruit that was detached from the ground, and then it came out and it immediately died. So now, when it came out, it never actually crawled on the ground. So what is the halacha? Miktsasa mahu. Or what if it came out and is partially still in the fruit and partially crawling on the ground? What is the story there? La'avir ha'olam mahu. Or if it came out, it was outside, the apple was already detached from the tree, and out pops a worm, and now it's never yet fallen to the ground, and it's in the air, and it's or on the fruit itself, but it's the air. The fruit is being held, and so it's never been on the ground. So what's the story there? In all of those situations, teku, not clear. Boy, Rav, so don't do it. Don't eat those animals. Eat those bugs. Boy, Ravashi, legag tamara mahu. If it's on the roof of the date, what's the story? Is that considered on the date, or is it considered not? Legag garinasa mahu. If the roof of a pit of the date, what's the story? Mitmara litmara mahu. Or if it goes from one date to another date by crawling through them, what's the story? In all of those, again, teku. Rav Sheshes Breder of Aide. So Rav Sheshes says, Kukyane Asire. The kukyane is prohibited. What is the kukyane? So Rashi helps us out. From the bottom of the narrow lines of Rashi, it's 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17 lines up. Kukai, kukyane, excuse me, I think is how they pronounce it. Tolaim keved ubishiberia. These are worms that are found in the liver and the lung. So what's the story? They are prohibited. My timer, why are they prohibited? Mi alma asu, because they came from outside the animal. So mi alma asu shibilatan habehema ima ochlin. I'm sorry, I should have said back into Rashi, the next Rashi, that they were swallowed by the animal with its food. Utchilasan shratzu al haaretz, but they began by creeping and crawling on the ground. And so while they are now in the animal, that's not how they began, and therefore they are a sheretz, that is shoretz al haaretz, and therefore prohibited to eat. And that's why, even though now it's in the animal, it is also going to be prohibited. Maskif la Rav Ashi ime alma. So what second? If they came from the outside the world and they came through the digestion, lishtakub derech beis harei, it should be found in the intestines. And so why isn't it there? So doesn't that show that it must have grown initially from within the animal? And so Ika de Amri, there's in fact, as a result of this question, there's another variant of how we understand the approach. Amar of Shisha, Breder of Idi, Kukyane Sharu, that actually the Kukyane is permitted, my taima, Mine Gavle, because it was formed within itself. Amar of Ashi, Pshita, that's obvious. Dima Almaka Asu, because if it was from the outside, Lishtakhu Derech Beis Harei, you should have found it in the digestive tract. The fact that it's not in the digestive tract shows that it must be something that grew within the animal and is therefore kosher. V'hilchosa kukyane asiri. But the halacha, in fact, is that the kukyane is prohibited. My taima minam nayem va'ailele be'usia. Because the animal was sleeping and it went in through the nose, as Rashi says, minam nayem va'ailele be'usiane. Kisha habahema yashana. When the yeshena, when the animal was sleeping, nichnasim b'chutma, it goes in through the nostrils. Umisham lakana, and from there to the lungs. Lakana, to the trachea, rather. Rhea, the lungs. V'kaved, and the liver. V'hilka lo mishtake derech beis harei, and that's why you don't find it in the intestines. So back into the Gemara. So
how do we make this presupposition? There are plenty of commensal bacteria that are growing in the intestine, and they're not swallowed, they're not eaten, so they're there in the body.
Yeah, 100%. But the point is that thankfully those are to the extent that those are not visible, then they're going to be that's not going to be an issue. We are dealing with something that's visible. And so the question is how did this visible worm get into the animal? And so in the general implication was that this got in, again, through the nostrils because it's not in the digestive tract. That's what we're talking about. So
but we're talking about those that are in the digestive tract.
No, we're talking about that was the whole question. These are found only in the liver and the lungs, and so how did they get there is the question. So the assumption was maybe they got there, they must have grown there by themselves, and the answer in the end is we say that they're prohibited because they came in through the nose. So tolaim, we have worms, darne de visra asire, de kavre sharyan, that if they are in meat, they're going to be prohibited, but if they're in fish, they're going to be permitted. So how do I know that all these words means what I say? Because take a look at Rashi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up. Darne tolam hanimtsaim bein or labasar. These are certain kinds of worms that are found between the hide and the meat. Kedemavshitin habehema, when you flay the animal. Ubelaz garbalaish. Asire, they're prohibited. The time of Mefarish Lakame. We're going to explain the reason why they're prohibited in a moment. The Kavre Share, the time of Kedem Mefarish Ravina. And we're going to explain, again, Ravina is going to explain why they are permitted. So Amrala, Ravina Li'ime, Ravina said to his mother, Avla li v'ana echol. Mix for me, and I will eat it. And what is he talking about? Avla li, Rashi tells us, Dechabre, we're dealing with some larva that was in the fish. Betoch hadagim, ditani, otam, shalo eraev ekotzbam. So mix them all in, and I will be able to eat it because those bugs that are in the fish, those are kosher because they grew in the fish. Amarle Rav Masharshia, Breda Rav Achal Ravina, Maishna Mehadetanya. How come this is different from what we learned? Es nivlasam tishaketsu, that you should hate their nevela, their carcass. Lerabos es hadiranim shebehema, that we see that in fact the larva found in animals is prohibited. Why shouldn't the larva found in kosher fish also be prohibited? So Amar Le, Ravina explains.
Caviar
Is larva in fish?
Yeah,
No, I thought caviar was the eggs of fish.
Right, the eggs of fish.
No, but we're talking about larva of bugs.
Okay.
Okay. Amar Le, Hachi Hashta. There's no comparison between the larva that's growing in a fish and the larva that's growing in an animal. Behema b'shchita hita mishtare. When it comes to an animal, it becomes permitted through shchita, as Rashi tells us. B'shchita mishtare. The elu shigadu betocha, and those things that were growing in the animal ad shalom nishchata, before it was slaughtered, bo mi iser aver minachai. They were already prohibited to be eaten based on the principle of aver minachai because they were growing within the animal. The shchitas habehema lo ahanya, but the slaughter of the animal doesn't help them. Liditu, for that larva. Shahare yesh lahem chiyut atman, because they have their own living status. And so effectively you have something that was living within a larger animal. So it becomes effectively part of the larger animal to require shchita, and yet this larva is still living and has not been shechted. So as a result, it's essentially never going to be permitted. And even though a fetus of a mother animal is permitted when you slaughter the mother, and that's in fact going to be the discussion of our next perek. Mikol behema, from all mikol behema tochlu. It says that you should eat from all of the animals. That's how come that's going to be learned. Nafgalan. We learn the fact that that's going to be permitted. Lekaman. Aval hacha b'isurayu kaimi. But here, once it's prohibited as part of the animal and therefore aver minachai, it's going to be prohibited.
How do we talk about shchita of the larvae, of bugs? Yeah. How do you even mention that?
Because the larva is growing in a behema that requires shchita. So now that the larva was growing in a behema that requires shchita, the larva itself requires shchita, but larva doesn't have shchita.
There is no shchita by a larva.
Exactly. That's why the larva in an animal is going to be prohibited. That's exactly right. That's exactly the point. There is no possibility for shchita, but it requires shchita because it grew within the animal and was therefore aver minachai within the animal. And so that's why the larva that grows in an animal is going to be prohibited. Unlike a fish. And let's take a look at how the Gemara explains the fish situation. Vahani, we are 1, 2, 3 from the bottom of the Gemara, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lines up. Third word from the end of the line. Vahani, and when it comes to the midalo kamahanya lahu shchita, since shchita can't work for the bugs that grew within the animal, b'isuraya kaiman, they remain prohibited, as Rashi explained for us. Aval dogim, but when it comes to the fish, ba'asifa ba'alma mishtare, they are permitted just by gathering them together. There's no shchita process. Vahani, and so as a result, ki kagavlan behetera kagavlan, and so when they are formed in a kosher animal, in an animal that's already kosher. And so therefore, the larva that grows in a large animal is prohibited. The larva that grows in a fish, which doesn't require shechita, is going to be permitted. So Tanu
So
Rabbanan.
cook the fish on the table. Bring the fish on the table. When you see worms in the fish, it's permitted to eat. Permitted theoretically from this to eat those worms with the fish
That's
on your
exactly
table.
correct. That's exactly correct. You're very disgusting. And that's exactly what Ravina was telling his mom. He told his mom, mix it all together so that I don't see them because I don't wouldn't want to eat them if I saw them, but it's mix them all together and I'll be able to eat it. And it's kosher. That's exactly right. So again, not advisable. Don't paskin based on this, but that's exactly correct. Tana Rabbanan holik al gachon. Anything that creeps on its belly, zen nachash. That's the snake. That's going to be prohibited. Kol, what does kol come to include? L'rabas hashilshul, that comes to include the worm. As the hadoma hashilshul, and anything that's similar to the worm. Al arba, if it crawls on four, ze akrav, that's the scorpion. Kol holech, anything that walks. L'rabas as achipushis, the es hadoma lechipushis, that comes to include the beetle and things that are like the beetle. Marbe regalim, raglayim, something that has lots of legs. Ze nadal, that's the nadal. You have to read the Rashi because it's beautiful. One, two, three, 3 lines, 4 lines up, and from the end of the line, and near the end of the line, Nadal, Mea Raglayim Korin Lo. It's
Centipede.
exactly.
Centipede.
That's why I didn't translate it because I wanted you to say it. Okay, so it's a centipede. Exactly. It has 100 legs. Ad Kol, including everything. L'rabos as hadoma ladoma. It comes to include anything that's even similar to a centipede or anything that's similar to that, anything that's similar to those things. So Tanya, Rabbi Yossi ben Drumaskis, Omer labyasan dag tahorhu. When it comes to the Leviathan, that is a kosher fish. Shneamar gava afike maginim. That his pride is in the strength of his shields. Tachtav chadude choresh. Under him are pointed shards. Afiki maginim elu kaskasim. What are those shields? Those are the scales, Shabo, that he has. Tachtav chadude chares. What are the pointed shards? Elus napirin sheporeach bahen. Those are the fins that he uses to swim. So hadron alach elu trefos, hadron alach elu trefos, hadron alach elu trefos. God willing, we will begin the next chapter tomorrow. So stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.
Why do we have to say the worms or the other creatures came through the nose? There are plenty of parasites and worms that actually they chadur they enter the body through the skin. The tinea and oxyurus, for instance, these are these pinworms that fall on the anus that enter, and they enter through other means. They just burrow through the skin, scabies, and so these are plenty of creatures that and they infiltrate the liver. They infiltrate. They're not ingested. They're not swallowed. They don't enter through the nose.
So in the end, it doesn't make a difference because we said that all of these things are going to be prohibited because they were part of the animal when it was alive. Therefore, they need shechita, and as a result, when you shecht it, they're still alive, and therefore they now have an independence, but it also still requires shechita, and so as a result, in the end, it doesn't matter how they come in. If you're able to see them, they're going to be not kosher because they require effectively their own independent shechita, which, of course, as we noted, cannot happen. So there's a distinction between the worms that are in an animal in the end and the worms that are in other things. And basically, what the Gemara is trying to do here is explain that there are multiple ways in. And that it can still be prohibited. And the bottom, and so I think that's exactly what you're noting is I think a goal of what the Gemara is trying to do is trying to highlight there are multiple ways in. They're all going to be not kosher. So don't unlike in the fish where we're now saying effectively that you have a worm in a fish and don't worry about it. That's not the case when it comes to the worms in a larger animal.
Hmm.
All
Worm
right.
in a fish, but that's interesting because if you have a worm in a piece of lettuce, you don't want to eat that worm. Or if there's a
No, no,
worm
100%. Well, of course,
worm that falls in your wine glass, you take the worm out.
100%, absolutely. Now, of course, the wine, the worm in most of those worms are clearly came later and didn't germinate, within the body of liquid
Yep.
that we're talking about, and so
Right.
they would certainly be not kosher to begin with. The only situation where we're allowing it is when it was microscopic when it came into the liquid and grew, or into the fish, and then grew into something that was macroscopic that we can now see.
Mm.
And so that's the situation where we're going to say that it's going to be permitted. But if it came, from outside, if you have a fish and now all of a sudden you open up 3 days later after not refrigerating it and it's all buggy and wormy, those probably came later, and therefore you don't eat them. Shouldn't eat the fish either. So anyway, but you're exactly right that all of this is really more from a true halakhic perspective, and so as a result can be used, for example, if something falls into something, to permit it, if there's going to be a significant loss, though, then you can use these things. But in general, we're going to say don't eat on any of these worms or bugs, etc. So, all right, have a great day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.